The night Hugh Rainmere slid the divorce papers across the counter. My chicken chili was still bubbling on the stove. I signed immediately. I even smiled. He thought I was crumbling, but I had been waiting exactly 2 years for this. And the part that made him most confident that I willingly gave up our 2 children was just the bait I needed him to swallow before he realized he had caught the hook. My name is Sophia Bennett, and if you looked at my life through the front window of our house in Cedar Hollow, Colorado, you would see a portrait so still it might as well be painted on the glass. I was 37 years old. My husband, Hugh, was a successful consultant who wore cashmere sweaters and smiled with his whole face when neighbors walked by. We had 2 children, Evan, who was 9, and Lila, who was 6. We had a golden retriever that shed on the rugs, a mortgage that was auto-paid on the first of every month, and a kitchen island made of quartz that cost more than my first car. From the street, we were the American dream wrapped in siding and snow, but inside, the air was thin. It was late December. That's strange. Suspended week between Christmas and New Year's, when time seems to lose its structure. The days were short, gray, and cold, the kind of cold that seeps through the insulation and settles in the baseboards. My life had become a series of motions so practiced they required no thought, only muscle memory. I was a machine built for the maintenance of others. The morning started at 6. It always started at 6. I did not need an alarm. My body knew the exact moment the furnace kicked on in the basement, sending a low hum through the floorboards that signaled the day had begun. I rolled out of the guest bed, my bed, and walked down the hallway. The floor was cold under my bare feet. I liked the cold. It woke me up. It reminded me that I was still here, still solid, even if I felt like a ghost in my own home. Downstairs, the kitchen was pristine. I kept it that way because control over the countertops felt like the only control I had left. I started the coffee. I packed 2 lunches. Evan liked his sandwiches cut into triangles. Lila would only eat them if they were squares. I did this without looking. I filled water bottles. I signed a permission slip for a field trip occurring in January. I wiped a smudge off the refrigerator door. By the time the sun began to bleed gray light over the snowy peaks of the Rockies visible from our backyard, I had already completed a dozen tasks that no one would ever notice unless I failed to do them. Hugh usually came down at 7. He did not come down to eat with us. He came down to get coffee before retreating to his sanctuary. He walked into the kitchen wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt, smelling of soap and that expensive aftershave I had bought him 3 Christmases ago. He looked right through me. It was a specific kind of blindness. He saw the coffee pot. He saw the mug. He saw the space I occupied. But he did not see me. "Morning," he said. It was not a greeting. It was a noise required by social contract. "Morning," I replied. My voice was steady. He poured his coffee, black, no sugar. "I have back-to-back calls until noon," he said, staring at his phone. "Don't let the kids run in." "I never do," I said. He didn't acknowledge the answer. He just turned, walked down the hall, and entered his study. I heard the heavy click of the lock turning. That sound, metal sliding against metal, was the soundtrack of my marriage. The rest of the day was a blur of logistics. I woke the children. I managed the chaos of lost socks and unfinished math homework. I drove the SUV over the slushy suburban streets, the heater blasting, listening to Evan explain the intricacies of a video game I didn't understand, while Lila sang a song about a snowman off-key in the back seat. I dropped them off at winter camp, a 3-hour program to keep them occupied while school was out. I went to the grocery store. I bought organic milk. I bought the specific brand of crackers Hugh liked. I stood in the aisle staring at a row of pasta sauce jars for 5 minutes, feeling a wave of exhaustion so profound it almost knocked me over. It wasn't physical tiredness. I could run on 4 hours of sleep. This was something else. It was the exhaustion of holding up a ceiling that was slowly lowering to crush me. When I returned home, the house was silent, except for the muffled voice of my husband coming from behind the study door. I put the groceries away. I folded laundry, I matched socks, and then I stopped. I stood in the hallway, holding a basket of clean towels, and I listened. Hugh's voice drifted through the wood. It was different. It wasn't the flat, monotone voice he used with me. It wasn't the stern, impatient voice he used with Evan when he was too loud. It was soft. It was lower. It had a texture to it, a warmth, a charm that I remembered from a decade ago. He was laughing. It was a low, intimate chuckle. "No, you have to wait," he said. I know. Tuesday. Yes." I stood there, frozen. The towel basket felt heavy in my arms. He wasn't talking to a client. You don't use that tone with a client unless you are selling something that isn't on the invoice. I walked away. I didn't bang on the door. I didn't scream. I went to the master bedroom, the room I hadn't slept in for 14 months, to put his towels away. We had stopped sleeping in the same bed over a year ago. It started with a complaint about his back. Then it was his snoring. Then it was his late nights working. "I don't want to keep waking you up, Sophia," he had said, his face the picture of considerate, husbandly concern. "You need your rest for the kids." It was a lie. Of course, we both knew it, but in a suburban marriage like ours, you don't call out the lie. You polish it. You put it on the mantel and dust it off when guests come over. "Oh, Hugh is such a night owl," I would say at dinner parties. "We found it works better this way." I opened his closet to put the towels on the shelf. The smell hit me again. It was faint, buried under the scent of dry cleaning chemicals and cedar. But it was there, a floral note, jasmine gardenia. It was sharp and sweet, and it definitely wasn't mine. I didn't wear perfume anymore. Hugh had told me a few years ago that scents gave him headaches. I reached into the pocket of his gray wool coat, the one he had worn to his consulting trip in Denver last week. My fingers brushed against paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt. It was from a bistro in Lodo, the trendy part of Denver. 7:45 in the evening, 2 entrees, sea bass and a ribeye, a bottle of Pinot Noir, $80 for the wine alone. The total came to $240. I looked at the date. Last Thursday. Hugh had told me he was ordering room service and working on a slide deck. He had texted me at 8 o'clock saying, "Exhausted, going to crash early, kiss the kids for me." At the exact moment he sent that text, he had been paying for a bottle of wine with someone who liked sea bass. I stared at the slip of paper. I didn't cry. My heart didn't even race. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. It was like stepping out into the winter air after being in a hot, stuffy room. I put the receipt back in the pocket exactly as I had found it. I smoothed the wool. I closed the closet door. I went to my room, the guest room down the hall, and locked the door. I knelt down and reached under the bed, pulling up a loose floorboard in the corner, beneath the nightstand. It was a cliché hiding spot, but clichés exist because they work. I pulled out a black notebook. It was a beautiful book, bound in Italian leather. Hugh had given it to me on our 5th anniversary. "For your thoughts," he had written on the inside cover. "Write down your dreams, Sophie." He had forgotten about the book years ago. He probably assumed I had lost it or filled it with grocery lists. I opened it. It was not filled with dreams. It was a ledger. I uncapped my pen and turned to the latest page. The handwriting was small, precise, and devoid of emotion. December 12th. Says he is at the shareholders meeting. Credit card alert shows gas station charge in Boulder at 2 in the afternoon. Meeting was in DTC. December 15th. Withdrew $400 cash. Claimed it was for the gardener's Christmas bonus. I paid the gardener via check 2 days prior. December 20th. New passcode on his phone. When asked, said it was a security update from the firm. I added today's entry. December 27th. Receipt in gray coat. Bistro Vendôme. 2 dinners. Wine. Date contradicts text message regarding room service. Mood elevated. Voice intimate. I closed the book. I didn't write about how it felt. I didn't write about the ache in my chest or the way my stomach turned. Feelings were useless. Feelings were variables I couldn't control. Data was reliable. I was building a case, not a diary. I sat there for a moment, looking at the black cover. For a long time, I had been the wife who waited, the wife who hoped, the wife who thought if she just cooked better chickens, or lost 5 pounds, or kept the house quieter, he would come back to me. I had been the wife who thought the problem was me. But the notebook told a different story. The timeline didn't lie. This wasn't a slump. This was an exit strategy. He was building a life without me, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, lie by lie. And he thought I was too stupid, too busy with carpools and laundry, to notice. The day moved on. The sun went down at 4:30 in the afternoon. The kids came home, bringing noise and cold air with them. I made dinner chicken chili. It was Hugh's favorite, though he barely ate it anymore. We sat at the table, the four of us, the picture of a family. "How was work?" I asked. Hugh looked up from his phone, annoyed. "Fine. Busy. Lots of compliance issues with the merger." "Is the merger going through?" I asked. "It's complicated. Sophia," he said, his tone dismissive. "You wouldn't understand the technicalities." "Okay," I said. I cut Lila's chicken into small pieces. I understood the technicalities perfectly. That night, after the dishwasher was running its rhythmic cycle and the children were asleep, the house settled into a heavy silence. Hugh went back to his study. "Just finishing up some emails," he said. I went to my room. I changed into my pajamas. I turned off the main light. Then, I opened my laptop. I didn't open Netflix. I didn't open Facebook. I opened a secure browser and logged into the student portal of an online university. For the past 18 months, while Hugh thought I was reading romance novels or sleeping, I had been studying. I was in the final stretch of a certification in forensic accounting and risk management. Hugh liked to talk about money. He liked to make me feel small, to make me feel like I needed him to understand the world of finance. He handled the investments. He handled the taxes. He gave me an allowance for the household and questioned me if the grocery bill went up by 10%. He didn't know that I had memorized the tax code. He didn't know that I knew the difference between a shell company and a holding company. He didn't know that I had been tracking the subtle shifts in our own bank accounts. The small transfers to an LLC I didn't recognize. The slow siphoning of our liquidity. I put on my headphones. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. I wasn't just Sophia Bennett, the housewife who made good chili. I was a student of his deception. I studied for 2 hours. My eyes burned. But I didn't stop. Every module I completed felt like adding a brick to my own wall, a wall that would protect me and the children when the roof finally caved in. Around midnight, I closed the laptop and hid it back under the loose floorboard with the notebook. I needed water. I stepped out into the hallway. The house was dark, lit only by the amber glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The wind was howling outside, a high-pitched whistle that rattled the window panes. It was a bitter, lonely sound. I walked past the study. The light was still on under the door. I stopped. He was on the phone again. "I know, baby," he whispered. The word hung in the air like smoke. Baby. He never called me that. Not even when we were dating. "It's almost done. I promise. Just let me get through New Year's. I have to stage it right. She's fragile. I don't want a scene." I stood in the shadows, my hand resting on the cold plaster of the wall. Fragile. He thought I was fragile. He thought I was glass that would shatter if he dropped me. He had no idea that I had already been in the fire. He had no idea that the heat hadn't broken me. It had hardened me. "She won't fight it," he continued, his voice dripping with a sickening mix of pity and arrogance. "Sophia doesn't have it in her to fight. She'll take the house, she'll take the check, and she'll fade away. It's better for everyone," he laughed then, a soft exhale of breath. "I can't wait to be with you properly. No more hiding." I backed away. I moved silently, placing my feet on the edges of the steps where the wood wouldn't creak. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from adrenaline. He was planning to discard me. He had a timeline. He had a strategy. He thought he was the player, and I was the pawn. He thought this was a tragedy happening to him, a man trapped in a loveless marriage with a fragile wife. Finding solace in the arms of another, he was wrong. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a heist, and he was trying to steal my life, my children's future, and my dignity. I lay down and pulled the duvet up to my chin. The wind battered the house, trying to find a way in. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't plan to beg him to stay. I didn't plan to save this marriage. I planned to survive it. And then, I planned to win. I closed my eyes, listening to the silence of the house, a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. There are marriages that do not break because of arguments, but because one person quietly sucks all the oxygen out of the room. It was the evening of December 28th. The house had finally settled into that heavy post-bedtime silence that usually signaled the end of my shift as a mother and the beginning of my shift as a ghost. I was in the kitchen, standing over the stove. The pot of chicken chili was simmering on the back burner, sending up small, rhythmic plumes of steam that smelled of cumin and roasted peppers. It was a domestic smell, warm and comforting, completely at odds with the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure that occurred the moment Hugh walked into the room. He did not shuffle in. He did not walk in like a man coming to get a glass of water. He walked in like a man entering a boardroom to deliver a quarterly report that he knew was going to result in layoffs. He was wearing his casual clothes, khaki trousers and a navy sweater, but his posture was stiff, braced for impact. In his hand, he held a blue folder. It wasn't a manila envelope, it was a crisp, plastic presentation folder, the kind used for high-end real estate listings or legal closings. He placed it on the quartz island. The sound it made a sharp slap against the stone was the only noise in the room besides the bubbling chili. "Sophia," he said, "we need to talk." I didn't turn around immediately. I stirred the chili one last time, tapping the wooden spoon against the rim of the pot. Tap, tap. I turned the burner to low. Then I turned to face him. "Okay," I said. He blinked. He had expected me to ask what was wrong. He had expected the frantic worry of a wife sensing a shift in the wind. My calmness seemed to throw him off his rhythm for a fraction of a second. But he recovered quickly. He had rehearsed this. I could see the script scrolling behind his eyes. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the bar stool opposite him. "I prefer to stand," I replied. He tightened his jaw. "Fine. Look, there is no easy way to say this, so I am just going to be direct. I have been unhappy for a long time. We both have. We have grown apart. Sophia, we are living parallel lives, and it isn't healthy. Not for me, not for you, and certainly not for the children." He paused, waiting for me to interrupt, waiting for me to scream that I had done everything for this family. When I remained silent, he cleared his throat and tapped his index finger on the blue folder. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sterile and sharp. "I have had my lawyer draw up a preliminary agreement," he continued, his voice gaining speed now that the hurdle was cleared. "It is very generous. I want to make this as painless as possible. I am not trying to leave you with nothing." He opened the folder and spun it around so it faced me. The paper was thick, high quality. The text was dense. "Here is the breakdown," he said, pointing with a manicured finger. "You keep the house. I will continue to pay the mortgage for 12 months. You keep the car. I will provide a lump sum spousal support payment of $50,000 to help you transition." He looked up at me, his face composed into a mask of tragic necessity. "And regarding Evan and Lila, I am petitioning for full physical custody." My heart did not skip a beat. It didn't pound. It slowed down. It became a cold, heavy stone in my chest. This was it, the trap I had seen coming, the one I had read about in the shadows of his emails and bank transfers. He wanted the children not because he raised them, but because they were the ultimate accessories for the new life he was building. A single father was sympathetic. A man who abandoned his family was a pariah. He needed them to sanitize his reputation. "Full custody," I repeated. My voice was flat. "It is for the best," Hugh said quickly, his tone shifting into sales mode. I have the resources. Sophia, I can afford the best schools. The tutors, the travel, you haven't worked in a decade. You are going to be finding your footing. It would be selfish to make the kids suffer through that instability. I can provide them with a continuity of lifestyle that, frankly, you cannot right now. He paused, looking at me with faux sympathy. I know this is hard to hear, but I'm thinking of their future. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had married 10 years ago, the man whose socks I washed, whose lies I had catalogued in a black notebook hidden under the floorboards. I saw the arrogance radiating off him like heat. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was the woman who cried when the soufflé collapsed. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cold counter. I looked him straight in the eyes. "What is her name?" I asked. Hugh flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the muscles around his eyes, but it was there. "What? The reason for the custody, the reason for the rush, the reason you are standing here on December 28th, 3 days before the end of the tax year, trying to close this deal like it is a bad asset," I said. "What is her name?" "This isn't about anyone else," he snapped, his voice rising just enough to betray his defensiveness. "This is about us. This is about the fact that I have evolved and you have settled. I need a partner who challenges me. Sophia, someone who understands the world I live in." "Right," I said. "Irreconcilable differences." "Exactly," he said, relieved I had given him the legal terminology. "So, if you will just review the terms." I reached into the drawer next to me and pulled out a pen. I didn't pick up the folder. I didn't flip through the pages to read the fine print about asset division or the non-disparagement clauses I knew were buried in there. I didn't need to read it. I knew exactly what it said because I knew exactly who he was. I flipped to the last page. I found the line marked Respondent. "Sophia," Hugh said, his brow furrowing. "You should read it. You should probably get a lawyer to look at it." He was confused. The script said I was supposed to cry. I was supposed to throw the chili. I was supposed to beg him to stay for the sake of the children. Then he would have to be the firm but gentle patriarch, calming the hysterical woman. I uncapped the pen. "I don't need a lawyer. Hugh, I understand perfectly." I signed my name, Sophia Bennett. The ink was dark and permanent. "There," I said. Hugh stared at the signature. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man who had braced himself to shove a heavy door open, only to find it unlocked, causing him to stumble forward into empty space. You agree?" he asked. "Just like that. Just like that," I said. He let out a breath, a mixture of confusion and victory. "Well, that is very mature of you, Sophia. I am glad you are being reasonable." "I am always reasonable," I said. He reached for the folder, eager to take his prize back to the safety of his study, but I placed my hand on top of it. "There is one thing," I said. He tensed. "What?" "The children," I said. "The custody is non-negotiable," he said immediately, his guard going back up. "I told you, I have the resources." "I know," I interrupted. "I agree." The silence that followed was absolute. The refrigerator compressor hummed. The wind rattled the window pane above the sink. Hugh stared at me as if I had just spoken in a dead language. "You agree," he whispered. "You are right," I said, keeping my voice steady, injecting just the right amount of defeat into my tone. "I haven't worked in years. I don't have a house of my own. I can't give them the life they are used to. You can. You have the money. You have the connections. If I try to fight you, I will just drain the little money I have and lose anyway, and Evan and Lila will be the ones caught in the crossfire." I looked down at my hands. "I don't want to be the reason they suffer. So yes, you take them. You take full custody. I will sign whatever waivers you need." Hugh looked at me with a mixture of awe and contempt. In his eyes, I saw the final confirmation of everything he believed about me. He thought I was weak. He thought I was a coward who was choosing comfort over her own cubs. He thought he had won so completely that it was almost boring. He didn't see the trap. He didn't see that I was handing him 2 children he barely knew. 2 children whose schedules, allergies, emotional needs, and daily rhythms were a foreign language to him. He didn't see that I was handing him an anchor when he thought he was grabbing a trophy. "I appreciate that, Sophia," he said, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a genuine smile of relief. "You are doing the right thing. You really are. They will have a great life, and you will have your freedom. You can find yourself again." "Yes," I said. "Freedom." He reached for the papers again. "I will file these first thing in the morning." "Wait," I said. "One condition." He paused, the folder halfway to his chest. "What?" "We wait until January 2nd to tell them," I said. "And you stay here until then, in the house. We do New Year's Eve like a normal family. We have the party. We watch the ball drop. I don't want their last memory of this year to be their father walking out with a suitcase. Give them 3 more days of normal." Hugh calculated. I could see him weighing the inconvenience against the victory he had just secured. 3 days of playing house in exchange for a lifetime of freedom and full custody. It was a bargain. "Okay," he said magnanimously. "That is fair. I can do that. For the kids." "Good," I said. He tucked the folder under his arm. He looked lighter, taller. The burden of guilt he had been carrying, however small, had evaporated the moment I signed. I had absolved him. I had made it easy. "I am going to head back to the study," he said. "I have some work to finish up. Don't wait up." "I won't," I said. He turned and walked out of the kitchen. He didn't look back. He walked with a bounce in his step, the stride of a man who had just pulled off the deal of the century. I stood there in the kitchen. The chili was still bubbling. The smell of cumin was still heavy in the air. I looked at the stove. The flame was blue and steady. I had just signed away my marriage. I had just verbally agreed to give away my children, to any observer. I was a woman who had lost everything. But as I reached out and turned the knob to shut off the gas, killing the flame, I felt a calm that was absolute. Hugh thought he was taking the children away from a helpless mother. He didn't realize he was taking 2 high-maintenance complications into a life he had built for a bachelor. He didn't realize that by giving up, I had removed myself from the defensive position and moved into the offensive. I wasn't fighting him for the kids, not yet. I was letting him choke on the reality of having them. I picked up the wooden spoon and tasted the chili. It was spicy. It was perfect. I looked at the empty doorway where my husband had stood. My eyes felt dry. My pulse was slow. The winter wind was howling outside, freezing the world into submission. But the cold inside me was far more severe. It was the cold of a surgeon picking up a scalpel. It was the cold of a hunter checking the wind. I smiled. He had the papers. He had the kids. He had the house. And I had him exactly where I wanted him. The moment Hugh disappeared up the stairs, the air in the kitchen changed. It shifted from the suffocating pressure of an interrogation room to the thin, sharp clarity of a high-altitude peak. I did not collapse. I did not slide down the refrigerator door in a heap of weeping chiffon and despair. I listened to his footsteps fade heavy, confident. The stride of a man who believes he has just cleared the board. Then, I walked to the back door and turned the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the doorframe and exhaled. It was a long, slow release of breath that I had been holding for 730 days. He thought I was broken. He thought the silence was shock. He had no idea that silence is simply the sound a predator makes before it strikes. I pushed off the doorframe and moved with purpose. I went to the laundry room, a small utilitarian space off the kitchen that Hugh never entered. To him, this room was a magical portal where dirty shirts vanished and reappeared clean and pressed. He did not know its geography. He did not know that behind the heavy industrial dryer, if you pulled back the loose section of vinyl flooring and lifted a false panel, I had cut myself with a utility knife one Tuesday morning while he was at a golf retreat. There was a cavity. I reached in and pulled out a heavy gray fireproof box. It was heavy not just because of the steel, but because of what it held. I carried it to the folding table and dialed the combination. 3915, the date I realized my marriage was not a partnership, but a long con. The lid popped open. Inside, there was no jewelry, there were no love letters, there was survival. First, there was the cash. It was not a fortune, but it was freedom. For 2 years, every time I went to the grocery store, I withdrew $40 or $50 in cash back. I padded the budget for household repairs. I sold old designer handbags on resale sites and asked for cash payments. It was a slow, agonizing drip of liquidity, accumulating bill by bill. $11,400. It was enough for a deposit on a rental. It was enough for food. It was enough to ensure that if he froze the accounts tomorrow, I would not starve. Next to the cash were the documents, passports for Evan and Lila, their social security cards, certified copies of their birth certificates. I had told Hugh I lost the originals during the spring cleaning last year. He had sighed, called me disorganized, and ordered replacements, which he kept in his office safe. He thought he held their identities. He held duplicates. I held the real ones. But the most dangerous item in the box was not the money or the paper. It was a small, silver USB drive taped to the inside of the lid. I pulled it off and held it in my palm. It was cold. This drive contained the anatomy of a betrayal. It wasn't just photos of him dining with Brielle or receipts for diamond earrings I never received. That was amateur work. That was emotional leverage. And emotional leverage is useless in a court of law against a man like Hugh. No, this drive contained the shadow ledger. 2 years ago, I had stumbled upon a letter from the IRS. It was addressed to a company I had never heard of, Rainmere Consulting Group, LLC, but it was sent to our home address. Hugh had snatched it away, claiming it was a clerical error, a mix-up with a client. But I saw the look in his eyes. It was a flicker of panic. That night, instead of sleeping, I went online. I didn't search for signs of cheating. I searched for hidden assets in divorce and shell companies. What I found over the next 24 months was a systematic siphoning of our marital wealth. Hugh wasn't just spending money on a mistress. He was moving it. He was transferring bonuses into offshore accounts. He was buying property in Nevada under the name of a trust managed by his father. He was deliberately suppressing his reported income while inflating our expenses, creating a paper trail that made us look cash poor on the surface. And worst of all, I found the documents he was preparing for me to sign tax returns where he listed me as an officer of a failing shell company. He wasn't just leaving me, he was setting me up to take the fall for tax fraud if the audit ever came. He wanted to leave me not just heartbroken, but legally liable. I had almost screamed that day. I had almost marched into his office and thrown the papers in his face, but I stopped. I realized that if I confronted him then, I would lose. I was just a housewife. He was the financial wizard. He would spin it, hide it better, or destroy the evidence. I needed to be patient. I needed to be the good wife. I needed to be so boring, so predictable, so intellectually unthreatening that he would get sloppy. So I became invisible. I cooked his chili. I washed his clothes. And every time he left his laptop unlocked for 5 minutes, every time he left a file on his desk, I was there, photographing, scanning, downloading. I put the USB back in the box. It was all there. The timeline of the transfers, the discrepancy between his lifestyle and his declared income, the emails to his forensic accountant asking how to shield assets from a spouse. I took out my phone. I opened a secure messaging app that looked like a calculator icon on my home screen. I typed a message to Dana Klein. Dana was not a family friend. She was a shark I had found 3 towns over, a divorce attorney who specialized in high-conflict asset recovery. I had paid her retainer in cash 6 months ago. We had never met in public. He served the papers tonight. I typed, "He thinks I capitulated." I signed the agreement giving him full custody in the house. He is staying until January 2nd. The reply came 3 bubbles later. "Did he take the bait, hook, line, and sinker?" I replied. "He believes I am too weak to mother them alone. He believes he has won." Good. Dana wrote back. Let him feel the weight of that victory for a few days. Activate Phase 3. I will have the subpoenas ready for the morning of the 2nd. I deleted the thread. Phase 3 was not about defense. Phase 3 was the counterattack. I locked the box and placed it back into the floor cavity. I smoothed the vinyl flooring down. I pushed the dryer back into place. The machine scraped against the floor. A harsh sound, but one that was familiar. I walked back into the kitchen. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. It was the rhythm of a machine that had finally been switched to full power. I went to the drawer where I kept the household odds and ends batteries, rubber bands, super glue, and pulled out the black notebook. This was the twin to the one under my floorboards upstairs. But this one was the decoy. It was the one I let Hugh see occasionally, filled with mundane lists and meal plans. But the real black notebook, the one upstairs, needed an entry. I climbed the stairs, the darkness of the hallway feeling less like a threat and more like a cloak. I entered the guest room, locked the door, and retrieved the leather book from its hiding spot. I opened it to the page dated December 28th. I picked up my pen. My hand did not shake. The papers are signed. He believes the surrender is genuine. He has no idea that by taking the children, he has just anchored himself to the jurisdiction. He cannot move them without court approval now. He cannot flee to his new life in Aspen without a judge's permission. He thought he was taking them away from me. He was actually locking himself in a cage with me. Motive established. He is rushing to close the fiscal year. He needs the divorce finalized to transfer the bulk of the assets to the new entity on January 5th without my signature being required. He is on a deadline. The bait. My compliance. My fragility. Status. Dropped. I closed the book. The leather felt cool and smooth under my fingertips. Just then, my laptop on the desk pinged, a soft, electronic chime that cut through the silence. I walked over and tapped the spacebar. The screen woke up, bathing the room in a pale blue light. It was an email notification. Sender Westridge Institute of Compliance and Risk Management. Subject, Final Certification Results. Sophia Bennett. My breath hitched for the first time that night. I hovered the cursor over the subject line. This was the only variable I hadn't been able to control. This was the only part of the plan that relied on luck and my own brain. Not Hugh's mistakes. I clicked. Dear Sophia, we are pleased to inform you that you have successfully completed the Certified Forensic Accounting and Risk Compliance Program. Your final exam score was 98%. Your certification is attached. Furthermore, per your request during the Career Placement Seminar, we have forwarded your credentials to the hiring partners at the Westridge Compliance Bureau. They were impressed by your capstone project on concealed assets in domestic litigation and would like to schedule a remote interview for January 3rd. I stared at the screen. 98%. A job. A real job. Not a receptionist gig. Not a part-time role at a bakery. A career in hunting down men exactly like my husband. I wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. I was a professional. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't the polite, practiced smile I gave Hugh at dinner parties. It was a feral thing. Hugh thought I was signing those papers because I was desperate. He thought I was looking at a future so bleak that I was willing to abandon my children to save myself. He thought I was a drowning woman clutching at driftwood. He had no idea. I didn't sign the papers because I was giving up. I signed them because I had done the math. I signed them because every general knows that to trap an enemy, you must first let him march into the valley. You must let him think he has captured the high ground. You must let him set up his camp and celebrate his brilliance. And then, when he is asleep, dreaming of his conquest, you close the pass. I shut the laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy street. The houses were dark, sleeping under blankets of white. It looked peaceful. It looked innocent. Sleep well. Hugh, I whispered to the glass. You have a big year ahead of you. I turned away from the window. I had work to do. There were suitcases to pack. Not for leaving, but for the show. There were lies to polish. There was a performance to deliver for 3 more days. But for the first time in 2 years, when I laid my head on the pillow, I didn't pray for strength. I didn't pray for patience. I prayed for January 2nd. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a decade, I slept without dreaming of falling. December 31st arrived wrapped in a deceptively bright, brittle sunshine that bounced off the snowbanks piled high along our driveway. Inside, I was busy constructing the illusion of a celebration. I hung gold and silver streamers from the chandelier in the dining room. I set out the crystal flutes for the adults and the plastic ones that looked like crystal for Evan and Lila. I queued up the countdown playlist on the television, the volume low enough to be ambient, but loud enough to fill the empty spaces in conversation, to an outsider, or perhaps to a spy looking through the window. This was the Bennett family preparing to ring in a prosperous new year. To me, it felt like decorating a funeral parlor for a wedding. Hugh was behaving with a manic sort of helpfulness that was entirely out of character. Usually, on New Year's Eve, he would lock himself in the study to wrap up end-of-year financials and emerge only for the final 10 seconds. Today, however, he was in the living room, struggling with a tangle of fairy lights. He wore a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Here, let me get that. Soph," he said, taking a heavy platter of deviled eggs from my hands. His fingers brushed mine. His skin was warm, dry, and familiar. It made my stomach turn. "Thank you," I said, keeping my face open and pleasant. "The kids are excited about the sparkling cider." "Great. That is great," he said, placing the eggs on the coffee table. He immediately patted his pocket, checking for his phone. He did this every 3 minutes. It was a nervous tic, a physical manifestation of his divided attention. I knew who was on the other end of that invisible tether. She was probably waiting for him to sneak away to the bathroom to send a Happy New Year baby text. At 6 o'clock. The doorbell rang. It was the reinforcements. Gordon and Marilyn Rainmere swept into the hallway on a gust of freezing air. Hugh's parents were the kind of people who believed that emotions, like fine china, should only be displayed on very specific occasions and never used for actual sustenance. Gordon was a retired corporate attorney who shook hands with his 9-year-old grandson rather than hugging him. Marilyn was a woman who had been 55 for the last 20 years. Her hair a helmet of blonde lacquer, her eyes constantly scanning for dust. "Sophia," Marilyn said, offering me her cheek. It was cold and smelled of expensive powder. "The walkway is a bit icy. You really should have someone salt that better." "I will take care of it, Marilyn," I said. "Come in. It is warm inside." "The house looks festive," she said, her eyes darting to the streamers, as if they were a personal affront to her minimalist aesthetic. "Though I see the rug in the foyer is starting to show some wear." "It adds character, Mom," Hugh said, stepping in to play the dutiful son. He kissed her cheek. "You look stunning. Is that new?" He pointed to a diamond tennis bracelet glittering on her wrist. It was thick, heavy, and ostentatiously bright. Marilyn beamed, holding out her arm to catch the light. "Gordon surprised me. Can you believe it? Just a little thank you for a wonderful year." I looked at the bracelet. I did the math instantly. That was at least $5,000, maybe 6. It was the same tactic Hugh used. The Rainmere men did not apologize. They accessorized. They bought silence with carrots. I smiled at my mother-in-law. "It is beautiful, Marilyn. It looks like a bribe." I thought. We moved into the living room. The evening proceeded with the stilted choreography of a play, where half the cast knows the show is closing, and the other half thinks it is opening night. Evan and Lila were the only honest elements in the room. They ran circles around the sofa, high on sugar and anticipation, wearing cardboard top hats that said Happy New Year in glitter. "Grandma, look at my Lego tower," Evan shouted, dragging Gordon toward the corner. "Quietly, Evan," Hugh corrected. But his voice lacked its usual edge. He was too busy checking his watch. 7:30, 4.5 hours to go. I circulated with a tray of appetizers. I filled wine glasses. I played the part of the gracious hostess, the woman who had no idea her husband had a termination agreement filed in a blue folder upstairs. I caught Hugh looking at me a few times with a strange expression, pity, perhaps, or relief. He watched me top off Marilyn's Chardonnay and probably thought, she is going to be fine. She is so adaptable. He mistook discipline for adaptability. The crack in the facade appeared at 8:15. We were all sitting in the living room. The TV was blaring a montage of the year's best pop songs. Hugh was sitting on the arm of the sofa, his phone in his hand, scrolling. Lila, my 6-year-old, climbed up next to him, leaning her head against his shoulder to look at the screen. "Daddy," she said, her voice piping up clearly over the music. "Who is Ms. Brielle?" The room did not go silent, but for me, the sound dropped out of the world. Hugh froze. His thumb hovered over the screen. Marilyn, who had been mid-sentence about her garden club, stopped and looked at her son. "Who?" Hugh asked, his voice cracking slightly. He pulled the phone away from Lila's line of sight, tucking it against his chest. "Ms. Brielle," Lila repeated, innocent and loud. "You were texting her. I saw the name. Is she your work friend? She sends a lot of hearts." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I did not look at Hugh. I looked at Marilyn. I saw her eyes narrow. She was a shark. She smelled blood in the water instantly. Hugh laughed. It was a terrible, jagged sound. "Oh, Brielle. Yes, she is the new social media coordinator for the firm. Young kid. Uses emojis for everything. Very unprofessional. I have to tell her to stop." He looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading silently for backup. "Help me." His look said, "Don't let this blow up now." I had a choice. I could destroy him right then. I could ask, "Why is the social media coordinator texting you on New Year's Eve?" Hugh. I could let Marilyn tear him apart. But that was not the plan. Chaos was not the goal. Control was the goal. I smiled and set down the tray of cheese. "Oh, is that the girl you told me about, the one who accidentally emailed the entire client list last week? You really need to have a talk with HR about boundaries. Honey." Hugh sagged with relief. I had thrown him a lifeline. I had validated his lie. "Exactly," he said, sweating slightly. "Nightmare. Total nightmare." Marilyn looked from me to Hugh. Her suspicion not entirely gone, but momentarily pacified by my calmness. If the wife wasn't worried, why should the mother be? "Well," she sniffed. "In my day, we didn't send hearts to our bosses. Professional standards have certainly slipped." "I am going to get more ice," I said. I walked into the kitchen. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Lila had seen the name. That meant he was getting sloppy. He was texting her right in front of the children. The disrespect was breathtaking. I walked over to the smart speaker on the kitchen counter, the high-end hub that controlled the lights, the music, and the security system. Hugh loved this thing. He treated it like a member of the family. I tapped the screen, navigating to the connected devices menu. I knew Hugh's habits. He was lazy with technology because he believed he was the only one who understood it. He thought I only used the internet for recipes. I scrolled through the history: Hugh's iPhone, Sophia's iPhone, living room TV, guest network, and there it was. Brielle's iPhone 14 Pro. Last connected December 26th, 2 p.m., December 26th, the day after Christmas. I had taken the kids to the movies. Hugh had said he had a migraine and needed to sleep. He hadn't been sleeping. She had been here, in my house, while I was buying popcorn for his children. She had been connecting to my Wi-Fi, probably sitting on my sofa, perhaps drinking from my mugs. I stared at the screen. I didn't feel jealousy. Jealousy implies you want to keep what is being taken. I felt a cold, hard validation. He had brought her into our sanctuary. He had violated the one rule of the affair: keep it outside the walls. I took a picture of the screen with my phone. Another brick in the wall. Another line item for Dana Klein. I returned to the living room with the ice bucket. "Here we go," I said brightly. The rest of the night blurred. The countdown began. 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute. We stood together. Hugh put his arm around my waist. It felt like a heavy iron bar. 10:98. the TV shouted. I looked at my children. Evan was blowing a noisemaker. Lila was jumping up and down. They were happy. They were safe. And I was going to make sure they stayed that way, even if I had to burn everything else to the ground. Happy New Year. Fireworks exploded on the screen. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, real fireworks cracked against the dark sky. Boom, boom. Hugh turned to me. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It was a dry, chaste peck. Happy New Year. Sophia, he whispered. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed. He reached into his pocket, the inside pocket of his blazer, not the one with the phone, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. I wanted to give you this, he said, his voice low so his parents wouldn't hear. Just a thank you. For being so understanding. For making this easy. Use it for something for yourself. Get a spa day. Buy some new clothes. I took the envelope. It was heavy. I could feel the stiff paper of a check inside. He was paying me off. He was tipping me for my compliance. He was giving me an entrance fee to his new life, thinking it was a severance package for my old one. Thank you, Hugh, I said. You are very generous. I didn't open it. I slipped it into my pocket. Gordon and Marilyn were clapping. The kids were screaming. The world was loud and bright. I looked out the bay window. The street was lit up with flashes of red and green from the neighbors' fireworks. It was a chaotic, beautiful explosion of energy. But inside me, everything was quiet. The clock hadn't just reset to January 1st. It had started a different kind of countdown. Hugh had 48 hours left in this house. 48 hours until the good wife vanished and the forensic accountant took her place. He smiled at me, swirling his champagne, looking like a man who had successfully navigated a minefield. Boom, went the fireworks outside. Tick, went the clock in my head. 1. The morning of January 1st broke with a gray, heavy sky that promised more snow. The festive energy of the previous night had evaporated, leaving behind the stale smell of flat ginger ale and the crushing reality of what was to come. Hugh was asleep in the guest room, probably dreaming of his tax-free future. I did not wake him. Instead, I packed overnight bags for the children and ushered them into the car. Where are we going? Evan asked, buckling his seatbelt. Is Dad coming? We are going to see Grandma and Grandpa Bennett, I said, checking the rearview mirror. Dad has to work on some boring papers today. Just us. We drove north, leaving the manicured, HOA-regulated streets of Cedar Hollow behind. As the scenery changed, the houses became smaller, the yards more cluttered, and the trees older. Stonebrook was the kind of town where people fixed their own fences and kept cars for 10 years. It was where I had grown up. It was a place of worn edges and deep roots, a stark contrast to the shiny, disposable world Hugh and I inhabited. My parents' house was a bungalow with peeling blue paint and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. When I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. This was the safety net I had been afraid to test. Elaine Bennett was waiting at the door before I even turned off the engine. My mother had a teacher's intuition. She could sense trouble from 3 counties away. She wiped her hands on her apron and rushed down the steps, pulling Evan and Lila into a hug that smelled of yeast and lavender laundry detergent. Look at you two, she exclaimed. You have grown a foot since Thanksgiving. Get inside. Get inside. Grandpa is making waffles. Miles Bennett stood in the doorway. He was a man of few words, a retired auditor who looked at the world through thick spectacles and saw mostly liabilities. He nodded at me, his eyes sharp. Sophia, he said, where is Hugh? Working, I said. It was the first lie of the day. Inside, the house was warm. It was cluttered with books, stacks of National Geographic magazines, and mismatched furniture. It was imperfect, and it was perfect. We settled the kids in the den with a box of old toys, wooden blocks, and a train set that had belonged to my brother. Once the sound of the train whistle echoed from the other room. I sat at the kitchen table. My mother placed a mug of tea in front of me. My father sat opposite, his hands folded on the tablecloth. Okay, my father said. Spill it. You didn't drive an hour on New Year's Day just to eat waffles. And Hugh never works on holidays unless something is wrong. I took a breath. I had rehearsed this. I knew exactly how much truth to give them and how much to hold back. If I told them everything, if I told them about the forensic accounting, the secret server access, the trap I had set, they would panic. They were honest people. They didn't know how to lie. If they knew I was plotting a takedown, my mother would look guilty, and my father would try to intervene. I needed them to be genuinely upset, so that if Hugh ever called them, their distress would feel real. Hugh asked for a divorce 3 days ago, I said. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, Sophia. No. My father's face darkened. The lines around his mouth deepened into a scowl. I knew it. I knew that man was too smooth for his own good. Is there someone else? I think so, I said. But that is not the worst part. I gripped the warm ceramic mug. He presented me with an agreement. He wants full custody of the children. He wants to move them, and I signed it. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. You what? My mother whispered. She looked at me as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. Sophia, you gave him Evan and Lila. I had to, I said, keeping my voice steady, fighting the urge to lean across the table and tell them it was all a game. He has the money, Mom. He has the lawyers. He made it clear that if I fought him now, he would drag it out for years. He would drain every cent I have. He would make me look unstable. So you just gave up. My father slammed his hand on the table. The tea in my mug rippled. That is not how I raised you. You fight. You don't let a man like that take your children just because he has a bigger wallet. Miles, stop shouting, my mother hissed, tears welling in her eyes. She reached for my hand. Sophia, honey, we can help. We have some savings. We can get a lawyer. You can't let him take them. He doesn't know the first thing about raising them. He's never even taken them to the dentist. I know, I said. I know all of that. Then why? My mother asked, her voice breaking. Why did you sign? Because I need time. I said. This was the pivot point. This was the partial truth I needed them to believe. I signed the papers to stop him from attacking me immediately. It buys me a few months of peace. It keeps the kids in their routine for now. But I am not giving up. It sounds like you gave up, my father muttered, standing up and pacing the small kitchen. You signed a legal document, Sophia, in the eyes of the law. That is a confession of incompetence. Not if I can prove I was coerced, I lied smoothly. Or if I can prove he is unfit. How are you going to do that? My father challenged. He is the golden boy. He has the job, the house, the reputation. I have a job too, I said. They both stopped. What? My mother asked. I start on January 3rd, I said. At the Westridge Compliance Bureau in Denver. I have been taking night classes online for 2 years. I am a certified forensic risk analyst. My parents stared at me. For 10 years, they had seen me as a housewife, a woman who discussed PTA meetings and casseroles. They had no idea that while they were sleeping, I was learning how to trace wire transfers and audit shell corporations. You went back to school, my mother asked, a slow smile spreading across her tear-stained face. I did, I said. And the salary is enough to support us. It is enough to rent a decent apartment in a good school district. It is enough to hire my own lawyer when the time is right. My father stopped pacing. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in years. He didn't see the little girl who scraped her knees. He saw the woman who had quietly sharpened a blade while everyone else was looking at the scenery. Forensic risk analyst, he repeated. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was the closest Miles Bennett ever came to a smile of pride. That is serious work. It is, I said. So I need you to trust me. I signed the papers to lull him into a false sense of security. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am broke. He's going to get sloppy, and when he does, I will be ready. But right now, I need you to play along. I need you to be sad. I need you to act like I have lost. That won't be hard, my mother sniffed, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. The thought of him taking those babies. He won't keep them, I said firmly. I promise you. But for the next few weeks, things might look messy. I just need to know that this house is here, that if I need to run, I have somewhere to go. This house is always here, my father said. You know that, but I want to go talk to him, my father added, his jaw tightening again. I want to look him in the eye and tell him what I think of a man who abandons his wife. No, I said sharply. Dad, listen to me. You cannot do that. If you confront him, he will put his guard up. He will hide the assets better. He will lock down the accounts. I need him arrogant. I need him to think he is the smartest person in the room. I need you behind me. Dad, not in front of me. My father held my gaze for a long moment. He was a stubborn man, but he respected strategy. He saw the fire in my eyes, a cold, calculated fire that he recognized. Fine, he grunted. I stay back, but if he hurts those kids... He won't, I said. He treats them like trophies. You don't break your trophies. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a bittersweet haze. My mother made pot roast, the smell filling the house with a comfort I hadn't realized I was starving for. I sat in the armchair in the den, watching Evan build a sprawling city out of blocks, while Lila narrated a story about a train that could fly. They were so innocent. They had no idea that their mother had just gambled their immediate future on a high-stakes game of legal chess. "Mommy, look," Lila squealed, holding up a wooden cow. "He is the king of the castle." "I see him, baby," I said, my throat tight. I felt a wave of nausea. Was I doing the right thing? Was I a monster for letting them go with Hugh? Even for a short time. What if Brielle was mean to them? What if Hugh neglected them? But then I remembered the alternative. If I fought him now, without the evidence, without the money, I would lose them permanently. I would be the weekend mom living in a studio apartment, while Brielle played mother in my house. I had to be strong enough to let go of the edge of the pool so I could swim to the ladder. At 4 o'clock, we packed up to leave. "Call us every day," my mother whispered, hugging me so hard my ribs ached. "Every single day." "I will," I said. My father walked me to the car. He put a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and grounding. "You are smarter than him, Sophia. You always were. You just forgot it for a while." "I remember now," I said. The drive back to Cedar Hollow was quiet. The kids fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the fresh air and grandparents' attention. The sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from the encrypted messaging app. Sender Dana Klein. I waited until I hit a red light to pick it up. "We have movement. A transfer of $20,000 initiated an hour ago from the joint savings to an entity called Blue Horizon Ventures. The address for Blue Horizon is a P.O. box in Nevada. It matches the pattern, but here is the kicker. The signatory on the receiving account isn't Hugh. It is a G. Rainmere." I stared at the text. G. Rainmere, Gordon, his father. The light turned green. I drove forward, my grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles were white. It wasn't just Hugh. It was a family affair. His father, the retired lawyer, was helping him launder the marital assets. They were circling the wagons, protecting the Rainmere fortune from the intruder wife. This was better than I had hoped. If I could prove Gordon was involved, I wasn't just suing Hugh for divorce. I could potentially threaten a RICO case for conspiracy to commit fraud. I could blow up their entire legacy. Dana sent a second message. "I need one more link. We need to prove Hugh controls the funds even if Gordon signs. Look for a power of attorney or a side letter. I am on it." I whispered to the empty car. I looked in the rearview mirror. Lila was asleep with her mouth open. Evan was clutching a Transformer toy. They looked so small, so fragile. I am sorry, I said softly, my voice lost under the hum of the tires on the pavement. I am sorry things are going to get weird for a little while. I am sorry Daddy is going to take you to a house that feels cold, but you have to trust me. I signaled to turn onto the highway that led back to the suburbs. No matter what happens, I promised the sleeping children. Mommy is the safety net. Mommy is the one who catches you, and when I catch you this time, nobody is ever going to take you away again. I drove into the darkness, carrying a lie in my heart and a weapon in my pocket, ready to face the man who thought he had already won. The 3rd of January was a Tuesday. It was the kind of gray, biting morning that made the windows of the commuter train steam up with the collective breath of tired people. I sat near the window, wearing a charcoal gray suit I had bought at a consignment shop 3 towns over, paid for with cash from my fireproof box. I held a travel mug of black coffee. I looked like every other woman in that car, a mid-level manager, perhaps, or an administrative assistant. Nobody looked at me twice. That was the point. I walked into the lobby of the Westridge Compliance Bureau at 8:45 in the morning. The building was a glass monolith in downtown Denver, smelling of floor wax and ambition. Westridge was not a glamorous firm. We were the people corporations hired when they were afraid the government was looking too closely. We were the cleaners, the auditors, the risk assessors. My supervisor was a woman named Karen, 50 years old with glasses on a chain and a mouth that looked like it had never tasted sugar. "Bennett," she said, tapping a tablet, "you are at Station 4. You have access to the LexisNexis database and the internal risk server. Your first batch of vendor audits is in the queue. We need to clear the backlog from the holidays. Do not make small talk. We bill by the quarter hour." "Understood," I said. I sat down at Station 4. I adjusted the chair. I logged in. For the next 6 hours, I was not Sophia Bennett, the deserted wife. I was not the mother whose children were currently at a winter day camp while their father worked at home. I was a processor. I was a machine. The work was tedious to most, cross-referencing vendor tax IDs with state registries, checking for sanctions, verifying addresses. To me, it was a symphony. It was the language of truth. People lie. They lie to their spouses, their priests, and themselves. But numbers never lie. They just wait to be found. I cleared 20 files before lunch. Karen walked past my desk twice, pausing the second time to look at my screen. "You are fast," she noted, her voice devoid of praise but heavy with surprise. "I don't like unfinished business," I replied without looking up. "Good," she said. "Most new hires spend the first week trying to figure out where the bathroom is. Keep it up." It was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that the universe decided to hand me a weapon. I was running a routine background check on a subcontractor for a construction conglomerate we were auditing. The subcontractor was a generic entity called Summit Logistics. Standard procedure required me to check their registered agents and affiliated entities to ensure there was no conflict of interest or money laundering risk. I pulled up the corporate filing from the Nevada Secretary of State. Summit Logistics, Registered Agent CSC Services, Manager V, K, Holdings. I clicked on V, K, Holdings. It was a nesting doll structure, company inside company inside company. It was designed to make people like me give up and stamp approved. But I didn't give up. I had spent 2 years tracking my husband's shadow. I knew what a hiding spot looked like. I clicked through to the third layer. V, K. Holdings listed a minority shareholder, RCG Partners. My heart stopped. RCG. Rainmere Consulting Group, Hughes Company. I sat very still. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The woman in the next cubicle was typing loudly. Why was Hughes Consulting Firm listed as a shareholder in a logistics company that was bidding on a project Westridge was auditing? I opened a new window. I used my employee access, which was far more powerful than the consumer-grade searches I'd been doing at home, to pull the financial history of RCG Partners. The screen filled with data, revenue streams, dividend payouts, capital calls. I saw a transfer, It was dated 14 months ago, November 10th. Transfer of intellectual property rights. Proprietary algorithm A7 transferred from RCG Partners to Lumina Trust. Valuation $1. $1. He had sold a core asset of his business, an algorithm I knew he had spent 3 years developing, to a trust for $1. I quickly searched Lumina Trust. It was a blind trust, but the beneficiary address wasn't in Nevada. It was a condo in Aspen. I knew that address. I had seen it on a Zillow link Hugh had accidentally left open on his iPad 6 months ago. He had told me he was just looking at dream houses. He hadn't been looking. He had been buying. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Dana Klein. I slid the phone under my desk, shielding it from the camera in the corner of the ceiling. Dana, I got the title history on the Aspen property. It was purchased by Lumina Trust. But here's the smoking gun. The trust document lists a primary beneficiary and a contingent beneficiary. Me. Let me guess. Brielle is the primary, Dana knows. Brielle is the trustee. The primary beneficiary is the unborn or future issue of Hugh Rainmere. But Sophia. Look at the contingent beneficiary. It is you. I stared at the phone. Me. Why would he list me as a beneficiary of a secret asset he was hiding from me? Then it hit me. It wasn't a gift. It was an anchor. If the IRS ever investigated Lumina Trust for tax evasion or money laundering, and they saw my name on the beneficiary line, I would be dragged into the investigation. I would be a party to the fraud. He wasn't just hiding money. He was implicating me. He was setting up a scenario where, if the ship went down, I would be the one handcuffed to the railing while he took the lifeboat. I felt a cold sweat prickle on the back of my neck. I minimized the chat and went back to the RCG Partners file on my work screen. I needed to know how deep the hook went. I searched for my own name in the corporate filings. Sophia Bennett. Nothing. Then I searched for Sophia Rainmere. There it was, a document dated March 15th of last year. Spousal consent to waive interest in commercial entity. I clicked the PDF. I remembered that night. March 15th. It was a Tuesday. Hugh had come home late. He had brought a bottle of expensive red wine. He had been charming, affectionate. He had rubbed my shoulders. Just some boring tax stuff for the firm, he had said, sliding a stack of papers across the kitchen island, right next to the fruit bowl. The accountants are nagging me. Since we file jointly, I just need your signature here, and here, and here. It just says you acknowledge I run the business. Do I need to read it? I had asked, tired from wrestling the kids into bed. God. No, it is legalese boilerplate. He had laughed, kissing my temple. Don't bore yourself, babe. Just sign so I can get them off my back. And I had signed. I zoomed in on the document on my screen. The clause I had signed wasn't a waiver of interest. It was an assumption of liability. The undersigned spouse establishes personal guarantee for the debts and obligations of the entity known as Blue Horizon Ventures up to the amount of 50% of marital assets. I stopped breathing. He hadn't just stolen the money. He had transferred the debt. He had moved the assets, the cash, the property, the algorithm into Lumina Trust controlled by Brielle and VK, holdings controlled by his father, and he had moved the debt, the loans, the lines of credit, the potential tax penalties into Blue Horizon Ventures, and then he had made me the guarantor of Blue Horizon Ventures. If he defaulted on those loans, which he surely planned to do once the divorce was final, the creditors wouldn't come after him. They would come after me. They would take the house he had so generously left me. They would garnish my wages. They would bankrupt me. He wasn't just leaving me, he was burying me. I looked around the office. The other analysts were typing, sipping coffee, checking their watches. They saw a woman doing her job. They didn't see a woman realizing she had been sleeping next to her executioner. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. The time for mercy was dead. I reached into my bag and pulled out a clean USB drive, not the one from home, a new one I had bought at the pharmacy that morning. I hit print on the PDF. I hit Save As to the external drive. I took screenshots of the Lumina Trust beneficiary page. I downloaded the entire transaction history of Summit Logistics and its link to RCG. I worked with the precision of a surgeon. Click, save, verify, click, save, verify. I had the proof. I had the timeline. I could prove that on March 15th, he tricked me into signing a liability guarantee. I could prove that on November 10th, he fraudulently conveyed assets to a trust to avoid creditors me. This was no longer a divorce case. This was a criminal conspiracy case. I ejected the USB drive. It was small, plastic, and weighed less than an ounce, but it was heavy enough to sink him. I put the drive in my bra, against my skin. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to remember that he was the one who made this a war. I finished my shift. I processed another 10 files. I smiled at Karen when I left at 5 o'clock. "See you tomorrow, Bennett," she said. "Absolutely," I replied. I walked out into the cold evening air. The city lights were blurring in the twilight. I walked to the train station, my heels clicking on the pavement. Hugh Rainmere thought he was playing chess. He thought he had sacrificed the queen to save the king. He didn't realize that the queen is the only piece on the board that can move in any direction she wants. When I got back to the empty house, Hugh was out networking, probably celebrating with Brielle. I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to the guest room. I pulled up the loose floorboard. I took out the black notebook. I sat on the floor, the streetlights casting long shadows across the room. I opened the book to a fresh page. I wrote in bold, jagged strokes. January 3rd. Discovered the Blue Horizon liability clause. He intends to bankrupt me to ensure I can never afford to fight him for custody. He does not just want to leave. He wants to erase me. New objective. Total dismantling. Target, not just the marital assets. I am going after RCG Partners. I am going after his father's license. I am going after Brielle's trust. He values two things: his reputation as a financial genius and his money. By the time I am done, he will have neither. He will be a cautionary tale told in boardrooms. I closed the book. I ran my hand over the cover. "You should have just divorced me. Hugh," I whispered to the darkness. "You should have just broken my heart. That I could have forgiven, but you tried to break my life." I stood up. I went downstairs to make dinner for myself. I was hungry, a ravenous, burning hunger. I ate standing up at the counter, watching the snow fall. It was piling up, covering the world in white. It looked clean. It looked new. It was the perfect weather for a burial. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. It was no longer the heavy silence of a tomb. It was the vibrating tension of a tripwire waiting to be snapped. Hugh was beginning to notice something was off. Not because I was fighting him, but because I wasn't. I had been leaving the house at 8:15 sharp every morning, dressed in my job interview suits, which were actually my work clothes for Westridge. I returned at 5:30, precise as a clock. I didn't ask him how his day was. I didn't ask if he wanted dinner. I simply came in, greeted the children, and moved with a terrifying efficiency. Hugh was a man who thrived on being the center of emotional gravity. He expected me to be a weeping mess, clinging to his leg, or a bitter shrew throwing plates. He didn't know what to do with a woman who treated him like a roommate she was politely ignoring. "You are home late," he said, standing in the kitchen as I walked in on Thursday evening. He was leaning against the counter, a glass of wine in his hand. He looked agitated. "Traffic on I-25, I said, putting my keys in the bowl. "It is always bad near the tech center." "You are going to the tech center?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "I thought you were just interviewing at local staffing agencies." "I am casting a wide net," I lied effortlessly. "I want to be sure I can support myself, like you said." He swirled his wine. "Right. Well, that is good." He didn't think it was good. He thought it was suspicious. Control freaks hate independence, even when they claim they want you to stand on your own 2 feet. "We need to talk about the timeline," he said, following me into the living room. "I want to expedite the final decree. There is no reason to drag this out until February." I turned to face him. "Expedite. But the courts are backed up. unless you have a judge in your pocket. I have contacts, he said quickly. My lawyer says if we file a joint motion for summary judgment, we can be done in 10 days. 10 days. He was accelerating. He must have realized that the Blue Horizon debt transfer needed to be finalized before the quarter ended, or perhaps Brielle was getting impatient. 10 days, I repeated, keeping my face neutral. That is very fast. Hugh, the kids are just getting used to the idea. The kids are fine, he dismissed. Actually, I was looking into schools near the new place. In Aspen, there is a private academy, Summit Peaks. It has a ski program, a robotics lab. It is miles better than the public school here. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just planning to move them. He was planning to erase their current lives. He wanted to transplant them into his fantasy world where he was the benevolent, wealthy father, and I was just a memory back in the suburbs. Aspen is 4 hours away, I said softly. How would I see them on weekends? We can work that out, he waved a hand dismissively. We can meet halfway, or I can fly them down once a month. The point is, Sophia, we need to think about their opportunities. Summit Peaks is a feeder for the Ivy League. You don't want to hold them back just because you are lonely. There it was, the manipulation. If I objected, I was selfish. If I agreed, I lost them. You are right, I said. Hugh blinked. Yes, I said, walking over to the bookshelf and straightening a stack of magazines. If the school is that good, we should look into it. What are the application requirements? Do they need transcripts? Vaccination records? I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. Tell me the name again. I will look it up tonight and see if I can get the paperwork started. Hugh stared at me. He looked like a man who had gone to punch a wall and hit a cloud. He had braced himself for a fight. For me to scream, "You can't take my children away," instead, I was asking for the URL. It is Summit Peaks Academy, he stammered. But, I can handle the enrollment. You don't need to worry about the fees. I just want to be helpful, I said, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. You are taking on so much responsibility. Hugh, the least I can do is organize the paperwork. He relaxed, visibly. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He took a sip of wine. Thanks, Sophia. That is really big of you. I appreciate you seeing the big picture. I always see the big picture, I said. Later that evening, while I was helping Evan with his math homework, the truth came out of the mouth of a 9-year-old. Dad said I can have a gaming chair, Evan mumbled, chewing on the end of his pencil. In the new house, he said there is a room just for gaming, and a hot tub. I smoothed his hair. That sounds fancy. Yeah, Evan said, looking up at me with confused eyes. But Dad said you aren't coming. He said you have to stay here to watch the house. Why can't you come? Mom, who is going to make the chili? My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I forced myself to smile. Mommy has work to do here. Sweetie, but don't you worry. Dad is just planning. Nothing is happening tomorrow. He said we are going next week, Evan whispered. He told Grandma on the phone. He said, I will have the boys by the 15th. The 15th. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking. He wasn't waiting for the court. He was planning to physically move them before the ink was dry, establishing residency in a different county to make it harder for me to file for an emergency injunction. My phone buzzed. It was Dana. Dana read alert. I just saw a draft motion on the docket. His lawyer's preparing an ex parte order for temporary custody. He is going to claim you are unstable and lack the financial means to care for them. If the judge signs that, he can take the kids immediately. Pending a hearing, we need to be careful. One wrong move, one emotional outburst, and he will use it as evidence. I stared at the screen. He was going for the nuclear option. He was going to paint me as the crazy, destitute ex-wife. I needed to disarm him. I needed to make him feel so safe, so victorious, that he would drop the ex parte motion because he thought it was unnecessary. I sat down at the kitchen island. I could hear Hugh in his study, typing. I opened a text message to him. I typed Hugh. I have been thinking about what you said, about the school, about everything. You are right. I can't give them what you can. I am scared. But I know this is best for them. I won't fight you on the move. I just want them to be happy. I am letting go. I hit send. I held my breath. 10 seconds later, I heard his chair scrape back in the study. Then silence. He was reading it. He was probably rereading it. He was savoring the total capitulation. My phone pinged. Hugh, thank you. Sophia, you are being a good mother. We will make sure you are taken care of. I didn't reply. I just let him sit in his victory. 2 hours later, around 10 o'clock, I was in my bedroom. I had the decoy laptop open, but I was monitoring the network traffic on my phone. Suddenly, a surge of data. Hugh was sending an email, a long one, and it wasn't to his lawyer. It was to b.millerluminatrust.com. Brielle. I waited for the sent packet to clear the router. Then I used the backdoor access I had installed on his laptop months ago, a simple keylogger disguised as a system update to retrieve the text. I opened the file. Subject: It is done, baby. She folded. Completely. I just got a text. She's agreeing to the move. She admits she can't handle them. I told you she was weak. She has no fight in her. We don't need to file the emergency order. It would just cost more legal fees and might spook her. I will just pack them up on the 15th and drive them up. She will probably wave goodbye from the driveway. Also, I moved the last tranche of the Blue Horizon debt into her name today. By the time she realizes she owes the bank $200,000, we will be skiing. She will be too busy filing for bankruptcy to chase us for alimony. Get the guest room ready for the kids. I told them about the gaming chair. That is all it took. Kids are easy to buy if you promise enough toys. Love you. See you soon. H. I read the email 3 times. It was everything. It was the confession of intent to flee. It was the admission of the fraudulent debt transfer. It was the disparagement of me as a mother. It was the cold, hard proof that he viewed our children as purchasable commodities. Kids are easy to buy. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage. Pure, white-hot rage. He thought I was weak. He thought I was folding. He didn't know that by canceling the emergency order, he had just removed his own shield. If he had filed that order, a judge would have been involved. Now he was just a man planning to kidnap his children across county lines and saddle his wife with illegal debt. I forwarded the email to Dana. Me. Got him, Dana. Holy Mother of God. Kids are easy to buy. That line alone will bury him in family court, and the admission about the debt, that is a felony. Sophia, that is bank fraud. Me. Is it enough? Can we strike Dana? We have the door, but we need to lock it. We need to serve him when he is most vulnerable. When he has no way to spin this, we need a moment where he can't call his dad or hide the laptop. I looked at the calendar on my wall. January 5th, Saturday. Hugh had mentioned a New Year's gala at the country club. He was one of the board members. He had to be there to shake hands and look successful. He wanted me to go with him. One last appearance as the happy couple to keep up appearances before the divorce news broke. Me Saturday night, the Marlowe Hall Gala. He wants me there to play the role of the supportive wife. Dana perfect, public, high stakes, nowhere to run. Me. Bring the papers. Bring the police if you have to. Dana. I will bring the fire. You just make sure he's there. I put the phone down. I could hear Hugh whistling downstairs. He was getting a snack. He sounded happy. He sounded light. He was celebrating the end of Sophia Bennett. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. I looked tired. I looked pale. But in my eyes, there was something new, a hardness that hadn't been there a week ago. Enjoy the gaming chair. Hugh, I whispered. It is going to be the most expensive furniture you never bought. I turned off the light. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, all I had to do was wait for the snap. Friday evening arrived with the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that settles in your marrow, the week of playing the double-agent dutiful wife by night. Forensic hunter by day had drained me. I needed milk. I needed eggs. I needed the mundane normalcy of a grocery run to reset my brain before the final act of this play began. I drove to the upscale market on the edge of Cedar Hollow. It was the kind of place where the lighting was designed to make the produce look like jewels and the shoppers wore yoga pants that cost $300. I pushed my cart through the automatic doors, welcoming the blast of climate-controlled air. I was in the dairy aisle, reaching for a carton of organic almond milk. When I felt eyes on me, it is a primal instinct, the feeling of being watched. It prickled the back of my neck. I paused, my hand hovering over the refrigerated shelf. I turned slowly, expecting to see a neighbor, perhaps someone who wanted to ask why Hugh hadn't been at the Rotary Club meeting. It was not a neighbor. Standing at the end of the aisle, next to a display of artisanal cheeses, was a woman. She was younger than me, perhaps 28 or 29. She had hair the color of spun honey, falling in perfect, glossy waves over the shoulders of a beige cashmere coat. Her skin was luminous. The result of expensive facials and rigorous hydration. She held a hand-woven basket containing kale, a bottle of sparkling water, and a single lemon. I knew her. I had never met her in the flesh. I had never heard her voice, other than the muffled giggles through a study door or the baby on a text message. But I knew the arch of her eyebrows from her Instagram profile. I knew the shape of her chin from the photos on Hugh's hidden cloud server. It was Brielle. My heart performed a strange maneuver, a hard, singular thud against my ribs, and then settled into a cold, rhythmic beat. I didn't run. I didn't gasp. I simply pulled the almond milk from the shelf and placed it in my cart. I turned my attention to the yogurts. I heard the click of heels approaching. They were confident steps, measured. Sophia. The voice was soft, cultivated. It had a breathy quality to it, the kind of voice that suggests intimacy and harmlessness simultaneously. I turned. I feigned a moment of confusion, squinting slightly. Yes, she smiled. It was a practiced smile, sad but brave. I am Brielle Miller. I work with Hugh, at the firm. Oh, I said. I kept my face blank. The social media coordinator, with the emojis. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A tiny crack in the porcelain, but she smoothed it over instantly. Yes, that is me. I realized we were neighbors. Sort of. I live over in the lofts. I saw you and, well, I felt like I should say hello. She moved closer, invading my personal space by just an inch. A subtle power move disguised as warmth. I know this is incredibly awkward, and I know what you are going through. Hugh told me about the divorce. She paused, waiting for me to crumble or lash out. When I did neither, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I just wanted to say that I admire you, really. Hugh says you have been so graceful about everything, so putting the children first, that is really rare. Sophia, most women, well, they get bitter. They make it ugly. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had slept in my bed while I was buying popcorn for my children. I looked at the woman who was currently the trustee of the fund meant to hide my husband's stolen millions. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a partner. She was the public relations manager for the destruction of my marriage. I don't see the point in being ugly, I said evenly. It doesn't change the math. Exactly, Brielle beamed, relieved. She thought she had found a kindred spirit, or at least a doormat she could walk on without getting her heels dirty. That is exactly what I told Hugh. I said, Sophia seems like a pragmatic woman, and honestly, that is why I wanted to talk to you. She glanced around the aisle to ensure we were alone, then leaned in closer. The smell of her perfume gardenia and ambition wafted over me. I know Hugh is planning to have you sign the final waivers tomorrow night, she said. I froze. Tomorrow night? I asked. I thought we were handling the paperwork next week. Brielle's eyes widened with feigned surprise. Oh, he hasn't told you. He wants to do it at the gala. The New Year's fundraiser at Marlowe Hall. My mind raced. The gala. Of course. It was perfect. Hugh was obsessed with optics. What better way to prove to his investors and clients that he was a stable, moral man than to have his soon-to-be ex-wife smiling by his side. Signing a document that looked like a friendly business transaction, it was theater. He wanted to turn our divorce into a photo opportunity. He thinks it will look better for the Blue Horizon partners if they see you are on board, Brielle continued, dropping the name of the shell company casually, as if it were a pet cat. If you sign the non-disclosure and the asset release in front of the notary he's bringing to the party, it calms the investors. They get nervous about messy splits. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was warm. It took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. "Look, Sophia," she said, "I want to help you. I know Hugh is offering the standard settlement, but I have some influence with the accounts, specifically the discretionary fund in the Sterling Bridge LLC. I held my breath. Sterling Bridge. That was a new one. I hadn't seen that name in the files. It must be the entity they were using to pay for the Aspen House renovations, or perhaps the vehicle for her own consulting fees. If you agree to do the signing at the gala quietly," she lowered her voice to a murmur, "and if you agree to let the kids move up to Aspen without a fuss next week, I can make sure an extra $50,000 finds its way into your settlement check. We can label it as consulting reimbursement from Sterling Bridge, tax-free." She smiled again, a benevolent angel offering a bribe. "It would help you get set up, buy some new furniture for your apartment." I stared at her. This wasn't just a mistress protecting her man. This was a business transaction. She was negotiating. She was buying my silence and my children with money she had helped steal from our marital estate. She was using a shell company I didn't know about, Sterling Bridge, to facilitate a payoff. And she had just handed me the name of the entity. I forced a look of pathetic gratitude onto my face. I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at my scuffed boots. 50,000, I whispered. 60, if you smile for the photographer, Brielle said, her voice tightening. She was closing the deal. I could really use the money, I said. Moving is going to be expensive, and I need a new car. See, Brielle squeezed my arm. We can make this a win-win. You get your fresh start. Hugh gets his clean break. The investors stay happy. Everyone wins. Okay, I said. I will do it. I will sign at the gala. Perfect, she said. She pulled her hand back and straightened her coat. The mask of the concerned friend slipped back into place. You are doing the right thing, Sophia. Really. You are brave. Thank you, I said. She checked her watch, a Cartier tank that I recognized from a credit card statement 3 months ago. I have to run. I have a yoga class. But I will tell Hugh you are on board. Wear something classic tomorrow. Nothing too flashy. She turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She moved with the fluid grace of a woman who believes the world is paved specifically for her feet. I stood in the dairy aisle for a full minute. The hum of the refrigerator case was the only sound. I looked at my cart. Almond milk, eggs. I picked up the carton of milk and put it back on the shelf. I didn't need milk. I needed to leave. I walked out of the store without buying anything. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat in the dark parking lot. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Sterling Bridge. She had given me the name. She had admitted to the bribery. She had confirmed the location of the signing. She thought she was cleaning up Hugh's mess. She thought she was securing their future. Instead, she had just handed me the map to their execution. I pulled out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. To Dana Klein. Change of plans. The target is the Marlowe Hall Gala tomorrow night. Hugh intends to force a public signing to appease investors in Blue Horizon. Dana replied instantly, a public signing. Is he insane? Me no. He is arrogant. He wants an audience. He wants to show the world he won. And Brielle just tried to bribe me with $60,000 from an entity called Sterling Bridge to make sure I smile for the cameras. Dana Sterling Bridge. I don't have that in the file. Me. Neither did I. But I bet if you run it now, you will find it is the link between the Aspen House and the offshore accounts. She manages it. She just admitted she has check-writing authority. Dana, I am running it now. My God. Sophia, if she is a signatory, she isn't just a witness. She is a co-conspirator. We can serve them both. Me exactly. I looked at the dashboard clock. 7:30. Me. Bring everything. Dana. The divorce papers. The fraud evidence. The restraining order preventing the removal of the children. And bring the subpoena for Brielle Miller regarding her role in Sterling Bridge. Dana. You want to do this in the middle of a black tie fundraiser? Me, he wants a show. Dana. He wants everyone to see how amicable we are. He wants to prove he has nothing to hide. I started the car. The engine roared to life, a growl in the quiet night. Let's give him the audience he ordered. Dana. I will see you at 8 o'clock. Wear something sharp. I put the phone down. I drove home slowly. The rage I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. Brielle had looked at me with pity. She had seen a housewife in a worn coat, buying groceries on a Friday night. She had measured me against her own youth, her own beauty, her own proximity to power, and she had found me wanting. She didn't understand that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a man with a gun or a corporation with a lawyer. It is a mother who has stopped crying. I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark. Hugh was still out, probably meeting Brielle for that yoga class, or perhaps laughing over drinks about how easy it had been to buy me off. I walked inside. I went to my closet. I pushed aside the sensible sweaters and the mom jeans. I reached to the very back, where a garment bag had been hanging, untouched, for 5 years. I unzipped it. Inside was a dress of midnight blue silk. It was structured, severe, and elegant. It was a dress for a woman who did not need to ask for permission. I touched the fabric. Tomorrow night, Hugh Rainmere wanted to close the deal. He wanted to sign his name and walk away with my children and my money. Tomorrow night, he would find out that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword, especially when you jam it into the gears of a machine that is running too fast. I closed the closet door. Game on, I whispered. Saturday evening arrived not with a bang, but with the soft, menacing rustle of silk. I stood before the full-length mirror in the master bedroom, a room I would likely never sleep in again. I was wearing the midnight blue dress I'd retrieved from the back of the closet. It fit differently than it had 5 years ago. Then, I had been softer. A woman made of compromise and milk. Now, the fabric draped over angles that were sharper. The neckline was severe, plunging just enough to be daring but high enough to be armor. I applied my lipstick a shade of red so deep it looked like dried blood. On the bed lay 2 envelopes. The first was a standard white business envelope. Inside was the settlement agreement Hugh had drafted, the one Brielle had bribed me to sign. It was the surrender. The second was a thick manila envelope. Inside was the shadow ledger. It contained the screenshots of the Sterling Bridge account, the Blue Horizon liability transfer, the email about buying the children, and a drafted affidavit of financial fraud ready for the district attorney. I picked up a silver clutch purse. It was small, barely large enough for a phone and a lipstick. I slid the white envelope in. Then, I folded the manila envelope and tucked it into the hidden inner pocket of my heavy winter coat, which lay on the chair. I would carry both, the weapon and the white flag. Hugh would decide which one I used. Sophia. Hugh's voice came from the hallway. He sounded impatient. The car is here. We can't be late. The board members start drinking early. I opened the door and stepped out. Hugh was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, the peak lapels sharp against his white shirt. He looked like James Bond. He looked like a man who owned the world. He looked up, and for a moment, his impatience vanished. He stared at me. His eyes traveled from the silver heels to the blue silk to the red lips. He blinked, clearly struggling to reconcile the frumpy, defeated wife he had seen all week with the woman descending his staircase. "Wow," he said, and the surprise in his voice was genuine. "You look incredible." "Appearances. Hugh," I said, my voice cool. "You wanted me to play the part. I am playing the part." He recovered quickly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Right. Good. You understand the assignment. Smile, nod. Let me do the talking. and then we will slip away to the library to sign the papers. Quick and painless. Quick and painless, I repeated. We drove to Marlowe Hall in silence. The gala was the premier event of the season for the Cedar Hollow and Denver elite. It was held in a sprawling estate that had been converted into an event center, all stone pillars and wrought iron gates. As the car crunched over the gravel driveway, I saw the lights blazing from the windows. It looked like a castle. Tonight, the king was coming to claim his victory, and the queen was coming to burn the castle down. We entered the ballroom, and the noise hit us instantly, a wall of laughter, clinking crystal, and a string quartet playing a sanitized version of a pop song. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roast beef. Hugh placed his hand on the small of my back. It was a possessive gesture, a signal to the room that everything was normal. See, his hand said, "My wife is here. My marriage is intact. My money is safe." Hugh, there he is. A man with silver hair and a face flushed from too much scotch approached us. It was Arthur Henderson, the chairman of the investment group that backed Blue Horizon. "Arthur," Hugh said, his smile switching on like a light bulb. He shook the man's hand vigorously. "Good to see you. You know Sophia." Of course, Arthur said, beaming at me. "Sophia, you look ravishing. We don't see enough of you these days. Hugh keeps you hidden away." "I have been busy," I said, taking Arthur's hand. It was damp. "Managing the household. You know how it is." "A noble calling." Arthur nodded, swaying slightly. "Well, your husband is a wizard, absolute wizard. The returns he is projecting for this quarter unheard of. We are lucky to have him." I smiled. It was a razor-thin expression. "Yes, Hugh is certainly good with numbers. He has a way of moving them around that is quite magical." Hugh tightened his grip on my waist. "Sophia is teasing. She knows I work hard." "Hardest working man in the room," Arthur bellowed. "By the way, Hugh, I saw the new prospectus for the Aspen expansion. Very aggressive. I like it." "We can discuss the details later," Hugh said quickly, steering us away. "Let's get a drink." We moved through the crowd. I was a prop. I was nodded at, smiled at, and assessed. I saw the wives of his partners looking at my dress, calculating its cost. I saw the partners looking at Hugh, calculating his worth. I scanned the room for Brielle. I didn't see her. She was likely in the shadows, coordinating the private signing, acting as the stage manager for my demise. Or perhaps she was smart enough to stay away, letting Hugh take the spotlight while she waited for the wire transfer. "Stop looking around," Hugh hissed in my ear as he handed me a glass of champagne. "You look nervous." "I am not nervous," I said, taking a sip. The bubbles tasted like iron. "I am just waiting for the main event." "Soon," he said. "I need to say hello to the mayor. Stay here. Don't talk to anyone about the move." He walked away, leaving me standing by a towering ice sculpture of a swan. I watched him work the room. He was in his element. He laughed at the right jokes. He touched shoulders. He exuded a golden aura of success. Watching him, it was almost impossible to believe that this was the same man who had emailed his mistress about buying his children with gaming chairs. It was terrifying how easily he wore the mask. "Sophia." I turned. A woman I recognized vaguely from the PTA was standing there. Her name was Karen, but not the Karen from my new office. This was a yoga and matcha Karen. "I heard you guys are moving," she said, leaning in. "Evan told my son you are going to Aspen. That is so exciting." News traveled fast. "It is a big change," I said noncommittally. "Well, you must be thrilled," she said. "The skiing is divine. And the schools? Is it true you are retiring Hugh to become a full-time ski bum?" She laughed at her own joke. "Something like that," I said. "We are certainly planning a distinct change in lifestyle." Hugh reappeared at my elbow 15 minutes later. He looked flushed, victorious. He had secured the investors. He had charmed the politicians. The only thing left on his checklist was me. "It is time," he whispered. "The library is free. I have the notary waiting. I nodded. Lead the way. We walked out of the ballroom, down a long, carpeted corridor lined with portraits of dead men who had likely also cheated on their wives. The noise of the party faded behind us. Hugh opened a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. The library was dim, lit by green-shaded lamps and a fire crackling in the hearth. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been opened. In the center of the room was a massive mahogany table. Sitting at the table was a small, nervous-looking man with a notary stamp. Standing near the fireplace, looking at her phone, was Brielle. She looked up as we entered. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered like fish scales. Her eyes locked on mine. There was no shame in them, only triumph. "You made it," she said. "I told you she would," Hugh said, closing the door and locking it. The click echoed in the room. "Let's get this done," Hugh said. Striding to the table, he pulled out a folder, the same blue folder from the kitchen, but thicker now. "Mr. Henderson is waiting for me to make a toast at 9:30. I want this filed before then." I walked to the table. I placed my silver clutch on the polished wood. I kept my coat on. I could feel the manila envelope pressing against my ribs. "Hello, Sophia," Brielle said, walking over. She stood next to Hugh, presenting a united front, the mistress and the husband, facing down the wife. "You look appropriate." "Let's skip the fashion critique," I said. "Show me the papers." Hugh opened the folder. He laid out 3 documents. "This is the final decree," he said, pointing to the first stack. "Standard terms. You get the house, the car, the 50,000. He pointed to the second stack. "This is the waiver for the children. Full custody to me. You get visitation rights to be determined at my discretion." He pointed to the third document. It was a single page, dense with text. "And this," he said, "is the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, and the liability release." "I didn't agree to an NDA," I said. "It is standard for high-net-worth divorces," Brielle interjected smoothly. "It just says you can't discuss the financial details of the settlement or the reasons for the split. It protects everyone's privacy, especially the children's." "And the liability release?" I asked. "It just clarifies that you accept responsibility for the assets in your name," Hugh said, waving his hand. "Specifically, the Blue Horizon entity. Since you are the guarantor, we need to formally assign it to you so I can clear it from my books. It is just a formality. The company is dormant anyway." I looked at him. He was lying to my face with the ease of breathing. He was asking me to sign a document that would saddle me with $200,000 of debt, effectively bankrupting me, while telling me it was a dormant formality, and he had brought his mistress to watch. "If you sign now," Brielle said softly, "the bonus from Sterling Bridge will be wired tomorrow morning. 60,000. Think of what you can do with that. Sophia." I looked at the notary. He was staring at his stamp, trying to make himself invisible. He knew this was dirty, but he was probably being paid enough not to care. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the white envelope. "I brought the signed copy of the preliminary agreement," I said. "Good," Hugh said, reaching for it. "But," I pulled it back, "I need to sign these new ones first, right? The NDA and the liability thing." "Exactly," Hugh said. He offered me a heavy gold-plated pen. "Sign here. And here." I took the pen. The metal was cold. I looked down at the paper. "I, Sophia Bennett, hereby waive all future claims." My phone buzzed in my clutch. A single, sharp vibration. It was the signal. I looked up at Hugh. He was smiling. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb walk into the slaughterhouse. He was practically vibrating with adrenaline. He thought he had pulled off the perfect crime. He had the money, he had the girl, he had the kids, and in 10 seconds, he would have my signature sealing it all away in a vault of legal silence. "Is there a problem?" Hugh asked, his smile tightening slightly as I hesitated. "No," I said. "No problem." I lowered the pen to the paper. I let the tip hover over the signature line. "Just one question," I said. "Sophia, Please, Brielle sighed. We are on a schedule. It is a simple question, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all the polite warmth I had feigned for the last week. Are you sure there are enough witnesses? Hugh frowned. What? We have the notary. Brielle is here. That is plenty. I don't think so, I said. I stood up straight. I dropped the gold pen on the table. It clattered loudly, rolling across the mahogany. I think for what is about to happen, you are going to need more than a paid notary and your girlfriend. What are you talking about? Hugh snapped. Pick up the pen. No, I said. I reached into my coat. I didn't pull out a gun. I pulled out the thick, manila envelope. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud on top of his NDA. That, I said, is your copy? Copy of what? Brielle asked, stepping forward, her eyes narrowing. Of the indictment, I said. Hugh laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous sound. Indictment, Sophia. Have you been drinking? You are not a prosecutor. You are a housewife. I am a certified forensic risk analyst, I corrected him. And that envelope contains proof of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud a spouse. It contains the logs from your secret server. It contains the chat history where you discussed buying our children. And it contains the bank records for Sterling Bridge. The color drained from Brielle's face so fast, it looked like a special effect. She took a step back. Hugh. She is bluffing, Hugh snarled, grabbing the envelope. He tore it open. He pulled out the stack of papers. His eyes scanned the top page. It was the email, the one about the gaming chair. He flipped the page. The Blue Horizon debt transfer log. He flipped the page. The screenshot of the Lumina Trust beneficiary page. His hands started to shake. The papers rattled like dry leaves. Where did you get this? He whispered. He looked up at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw true terror in his eyes. You hacked me. I audited you, I said cold. There is a difference. You can't use this, he stammered, his arrogance crumbling into desperation. This is inadmissible. It is theft. Actually, I said, checking my watch, it is evidence. And I didn't just bring it to show you. Who else has this? Brielle screeched. Sophia, if you release this, you ruin everything. The investors will pull out. The firm will collapse. That is the point, I said. I will sue you, Hugh roared, slamming his fist on the table. I will bury you. You think you can walk in here and threaten me? I am Hugh Rainmere. I own this town. You don't own anything, I said calmly. Not anymore. I am not signing anything, he spat. And you are not leaving this room with that envelope. He moved toward me. He looked dangerous. The veneer of the civilized businessman was gone. He was a cornered animal. Hugh, don't, Brielle warned, but he ignored her. Give me the other copy, he demanded. Reaching for my coat, I didn't flinch. I didn't back away. I wouldn't do that, I said. Or what? He sneered. You will scream. No, I said. I won't have to. I looked past him, toward the heavy oak door. You asked if there were enough witnesses. Hugh, I decided to bring a few of my own. As if on cue, the handle of the library door turned. It wasn't locked anymore. Someone had a key. The door swung open with a heavy creak. The sounds of the party drifted in laughter. Music. The clinking of glasses. But the figure standing in the doorway brought a sudden, freezing silence to the room. It wasn't a waiter. It wasn't a guest. It was a tall, severe-looking woman with graying hair and a briefcase. Dana Klein. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, looking grim and holding a stack of files that matched mine, was a man Hugh knew very well. A man Hugh had spent the last hour charming. A man whose investment fund was the only thing keeping Hugh's shell companies afloat. Arthur Henderson. And behind them, the distinct, uniform shapes of two uniformed police officers. Hugh froze. His hand, which had been reaching for my coat, dropped to his side. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Arthur stepped into the room. He didn't look drunk anymore. He looked sober, angry, and betrayed. "Hugh," Arthur said, his voice like gravel. "Ms. Klein here just showed me some very interesting documents regarding your use of my fund's capital." Arthur looked at the papers scattered on the table, the proof of the fraud. "I think," Arthur said, "we need to have a very different kind of conversation." I looked at Hugh. He was pale, shaking, ruined. I smiled. "Happy New Year." "Hugh," I whispered. The silence in the library was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with the static electricity of a career disintegrating in real time. Hugh Rainmere, a man who had spent 40 years constructing a fortress of invulnerability around himself, stood paralyzed. He looked at Arthur Henderson, the chairman of the investment fund that kept his consulting firm alive, and then he looked at the police officers standing like sentinels at the door. "Arthur," Hugh stammered, his voice losing all its rich, baritone confidence. "This is a misunderstanding. My wife she is emotional. We are going through a difficult divorce. She is trying to leverage—" "Stop," Arthur said. The word was not shouted. It was dropped like a gavel. He walked to the mahogany table and picked up the document Sophia had thrown down, the liability transfer for Blue Horizon Ventures. "Ms. Klein contacted me an hour ago," Arthur said, gesturing to Dana. "She informed me that you were attempting to transfer $200,000 of debt secured by my fund's capital onto your wife's personal credit history without her informed consent. She provided the digital trail." Arthur looked up, his eyes cold behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "We have a strict morality clause in our partnership agreement. Hugh, fraud is a termination event. Attempting to frame your spouse for corporate malfeasance. That is a criminal event." Hugh turned to me. "Sophia, tell them. Tell them you knew. Tell them we discussed this." I looked at him. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I stood with the stillness of a statue carved from ice. "We never discussed it, Hugh," I said clearly. "You told me it was a formality. You told me the company was dormant. You tried to turn me into a shield so that when the audit came, I would be the one going to prison, not you." I reached into the folder and pulled out the spousal consent form he had tried to make me sign 5 minutes ago. I held it up for the room to see. "This," I said, my voice steady, "was his insurance policy. He wasn't just leaving me. He was setting me up. He wanted to take the children to Aspen, live off the hidden money in the Lumina Trust, and leave me here to drown in his debt." Brielle let out a small, strangled gasp. She stepped away from Hugh, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She saw the ship sinking, and she was already looking for the life raft. "I didn't know," Brielle whispered, looking at Arthur. "I just managed the social media. I didn't know about the debt." "You are the trustee of the Sterling Bridge account that received the diverted funds," Dana Klein said. Stepping forward, her voice was sharp, professional, and terrifying. "We have the wire transfers. Ms. Miller, you accepted $60,000 of misappropriated marital assets yesterday. That makes you an accessory to wire fraud." Brielle went pale and backed into the corner, silenced. Hugh looked around the room. The walls were closing in. The notary was packing his bag, desperate to flee. The police officers were watching his hands. "Why?" Hugh whispered, staring at me. "You signed the papers. You agreed to give me the kids. You said you were weak. You said you couldn't handle them." "I lied," I said. I took a step closer to the table. "I agreed to the divorce because I needed you to feel safe," I said. "I gave up custody because I needed you to feel victorious. Because when you feel victorious, Hugh, you get sloppy, you get arrogant." I pointed to the papers on the table. "If I had fought you last week, you would have buried this evidence. You would have wiped the servers. You would have hidden the money so deep, I never would have found it. I had to make you believe you had already won, so that you would leave the vault door open." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "I didn't give up my children. I used your greed to ensure you could never take them again." Hugh slumped. The air went out of him. He looked at the email printout, the one where he claimed kids were easy to buy. He knew, in that moment, that he would never see a family court judge rule in his favor. That email was a death sentence for his custody rights. Dana stepped up to the table. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a fresh document. It wasn't the one Hugh had prepared. It was thick, stapled, and drafted on heavy bond paper. "This is the new settlement agreement," Dana said. She laid it over Hugh's ridiculous NDA. "Here are the terms," she recited, ticking them off on her fingers. "Sophia gets the house, free and clear. You will pay off the mortgage immediately using the funds from the Sterling Bridge account before we freeze it. Sophia gets full physical and legal custody of Evan and Lila. You get supervised visitation every other weekend, provided you pass a forensic audit and attend mandatory parenting classes." Hugh's head snapped up. "Supervised? That is insane. I am their father." "You are a flight risk who admitted in writing to planning to kidnap them across county lines," Dana shot back. "You are lucky we are offering visitation at all." "I won't sign that," Hugh snarled, trying to summon one last shred of bravado. "You can't force me. I will fight this in court. I will drag this out for 10 years. "You could," I said. I reached into my coat again. I pulled out the second envelope, the one I had kept hidden. I placed it gently on top of the settlement. "This," I said, "is a formal criminal complaint. It is drafted and ready to be filed with the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. It details the tax evasion, the wire fraud, the identity theft regarding the liability transfer, and the conspiracy." I looked him in the eye. "Arthur has a duty to report this to the SEC, I said, glancing at the chairman, who nodded grimly. "But whether this goes to the criminal prosecutor is up to me. If you sign the settlement, if you give me what is rightfully mine, and let me raise my children in peace, I will treat this as a civil matter. I will walk away. You can deal with Arthur and your investors privately." I paused. The room was so quiet, I could hear the fire popping in the grate. "But if you don't sign," I said, "I file this, and you won't be going to Aspen. Hugh, you will be going to federal prison." I pushed the gold pen, his pen toward him. "So, the choice is yours. Do you want to be broke and divorced, or do you want to be broke, divorced, and an inmate?" Hugh looked at the pen. He looked at Arthur, whose face was stone. He looked at Brielle, who was refusing to meet his eyes. He looked at the police officers. He realized he was alone. The money, the status, the mistress, it was all smoke, and I had just turned on a giant fan. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly the tip scratched the paper. He signed, "Hugh Rainmere." He signed the custody waiver. He signed the asset transfer. He signed the admission of liability for the debt. When he finished, he dropped the pen. It rolled off the table and hit the floor. "Are we done?" he rasped. Dana picked up the papers. She checked the signatures. She nodded to me. "We are done." "Arthur," I said, turning to the older man, "thank you for coming. I am sorry to ruin your party." "You didn't ruin it, Sophia," Arthur said, looking at Hugh with disgust. "You cleaned it up." I turned to leave. I didn't look at Hugh. He was sitting in the chair, staring at his hands. A man who had tried to steal a life and ended up losing his own. I walked out of the library. I walked down the long corridor. I walked through the ballroom, past the ice sculpture, past the people who thought I was the good wife. I walked out into the cold night air. It was snowing again. The flakes were large and soft, covering the world in a clean white blanket. I got into the car. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just exhaled. It was over. The next morning, the sun came up over Cedar Hollow. It was brilliant and blindingly bright. I was in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Hugh had served me the divorce papers just a week ago. But the air was different now. It was light. It was mine. I was making pancakes. Evan and Lila were sitting at the counter, still in their pajamas. "Mom, are we still going to the new house with the gaming chair?" Evan asked, pouring syrup on his plate. "No, honey," I said, flipping a pancake. Daddy has to go away for a while to fix some big mistakes he made at work. We are staying here, in our house. Oh, Evan said. He thought for a second, then shrugged. That is okay. I like this house better anyway. The Wi-Fi is faster. Lila giggled. And you make better pancakes. I smiled. I do, don't I? After breakfast, when the kids were watching cartoons, I went upstairs to the guest room. I pulled up the floorboard. I took out the black notebook. I didn't write in it. There was nothing left to track. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. I carried the notebook and the USB drive downstairs to the fireplace. I lit a match. I watched the leather cover curl and blacken. I watched the pages turn to ash. I wasn't Sophia the victim anymore. I wasn't Sophia the schemer. I was just Sophia. I looked out the window at the snow-covered yard. Hugh was gone. The threat was gone. My children were safe, laughing in the next room. Revenge doesn't always look like a burning building or a public scream. Sometimes, revenge is simply being smart enough to set the table, wait for the guest to arrive, and then let him eat the poison he brought for you. I turned back to the stove. The coffee was ready, and for the first time in 2 years, it tasted sweet. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed Sophia's journey from a silenced wife to a mastermind who reclaimed her life, please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on her strategy. Don't forget to subscribe to the Amelia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Your support means the world to us.